In this box is a $40 PC I paid off eBay. And it's an AMD system, not a good $40 Intel system. Let's see how terrible it is. Blech. Straight out of the box, we meet the star of our show. In HP, I have no idea what processor's in it because I can't remember Athlon's. But hopefully, this thing runs. I wouldn't recommend anything AMD below AM4, because anything AM3 based back then wasn't. Well, let's just say it sucked. So, nearly after a whole week of camera issues, tripod issues, it was working. Finally, I got 4 graphics cards we can potentially put in our system. 2 of these I found for free in e-waste. Here we have Dell's RX 550 with 2 mini HDMIs, which is kind of horrendous, and the DisplayPort, which you should be using, obviously. Next we have the one and only GT710, a card released like what, 2012 and still being produced. It's no longer supported by Nvidia, but Amazon definitely has tons of these, and you should definitely not buy them just because they're available. Some HD card. I don't know AMD's naming scheme with this. Our next GPU, similar in architecture, is the V4900. Well, it is not a modern graphics card by any standard, and will definitely lose driver support in the following year. It's worth giving it a try. And here we have the same RX 550, but an Asus version. And in theory, the Asus version of the card should be clocked faster than this one. Hold on. In theory, they could be clocked the same speed, even though this one was an Dell and has worse cooling. They should be clocked the same speed. And these two maybe can run in Crossfire, but we won't be doing that because there ain't no way in hell this motherboard supports Crossfire. Here we have the poor thing trying to run Fallout. If it can't even run Fallout 4, then it probably can't run anything else. And remind you, this is by iGPU. Luckily, we have a card lying around. Oh, Ball 4 just loaded. Speaking of 16 gigabytes of RAM, let's upgrade the system to 16 gigabytes of RAM. Well, the first thing is obvious we're gonna do. Remove the heinous RAM. You know, 8 gigs is meh. You could get away with 8 gigs in some titles, but when you're running an older system, the CPU would really benefit with some better gigs. We're upgrading to some Silicon Power RAM. Silicon Power is an Amazon-based company which just makes cheap SSDs. And other stuff. That's pretty much it. These are both 8 gig sticks, and they're both have a cheap heatsink glued onto them, basically. Don't expect much of improvement because This HP system definitely cannot read XMP profiles. And even if it could, I don't even know if these are clocked very high, if this HP system could even read XMP profiles. Alright, now to see if Fallout will boot up in this one. Well, the game is basically unplayable, even with 16 gigs. This is mostly due to the VRAM not being adjustable. You can adjust VRAM on some iGPUs, like more modern ones, but older ones like this, you're pretty much stuck. And let's cram a graphics card into this. And no, it's not the GT710, because we actually might have a weaker card than the GT710. Here we have the HT6450. Note that this is a HP OEM, so it's running the stock 512 megabytes of VRAM GDDR3. It's what it lacks in any form of processing, it makes up in many variants. According to Tech Power Up, there's a variant with GDDR5, 2 gigabytes, 1 gigabyte, a lot of clock tuning. And speaking of clock tuning, I might be able to overclock this to 1 gigahertz, if even possible. Well, there's not much to say about the Radeon FirePro, other than its drivers not being supported for this kind of work. It's a workstation graphics card, and it's not meant to game. I mean, you can game on some workstation cards and gain some very good performance, but not as efficiently as a card dedicated to gaming. As one might hear in the background, you can hear the tiny little RX 550 I showed you not too long ago. This is the small fan variant, a low profile variant with the mini display ports. And that tiny little fan, it's struggling to cool such a card. Even though the card is slot powered, that doesn't mean it'll produce less heat. And it's definitely overheating at 80 degrees Celsius. The cooling runs good. Well, by my standards, it looks kind of dumb. So what better way to just stick on a thermal take cooler and some cryonaut. Now to see if it works. Oh, silly me. Everything else seems to work. This is the Asus variant of the RX 550, not a low profile version of it. Well, some may ask, what's the difference? What's the benefits? Well, according to Tech Power Up, the Dell variant is clocked higher on core speed, but clocked lower on memory speed, and the Asus is still clocked at the same stock speeds. But the main difference is in cooling. The Asus variant, as seen in the introduction, has a beefier cooler compared to the Dell variant. And the Dell, if you look back at the temperature benchmarks, you can see it's suffering at an average of 80, while the RX 550
even in a low airflow environment like this HP system, it's got a cold around 71 Celsius. Yeah, that's a pretty good temperature for a card. And now on to the GT710, a nightmare of a card. Well, immediately we see the GT710 struggling. Not surprising due to its very low specs. And while overclocking the GT710 might fix this issue, it'd just be better for you to get, well, a beefier card. Like just some two SATA adapters and to a 6-pin and a GTX, I don't know, 1650, and you might be able to run very fine. Actually, the GTX 1650 can run without any external power at some scenarios. Sure, you won't get the best performance, but what do you expect? It's slot powered, and you have like, if you're watching this, you'd probably have like a Dell system, and Dell systems don't have any external power, and their power supplies are very low because Dell don't expect you to use more than what can the PCIe slot can provide. Hell, if you're even feeling brave, you can run a 1660 Super in a system and might get good performance. Maybe the CPU will become a bottleneck if you have a system similar to this. What you will realize is that the newer RTX 3050, this is the 8 gig variant, not the loser 6 gig variant. It's actually bottlenecking the i7, which I'm pretty sure have nearly a 5-year age gap between them. And the fact that the RTX 3050 is struggling means that this CPU is still got kicked to it. And you can technically use it in Windows 11 if you can bypass the TPM and CPU check. A lot of the hardware will become e-waste because they're not officially supported, but you can try to work around it. And it's not recommended to work around it, but it's not good to fill landfills with e-waste. The reason why I haven't used this rig for Fallout 4 is because of the drives. It's really hard to swap games over using an internal drive instead of an external one, because I think there's a physical difference between an external drive and an internal drive. I mean, you can swap internal drives once in a while, but constantly doing it might cause issues. GTA is one of those games where you don't really need a very good card, it just makes the game better. But there is some point where if your computer is so slow, the game will actually start to lag. And here's the FirePro, and its gameplay can be only described in one word: average. Not the lowest, not the highest. You can still play the game. But here's the thing. I gave the FirePro an unfair advantage because of its low VRAM. I actually set it to DirectX 10 instead of DirectX 11. Here we have the RX 550, and this is the Dell loser variant. And let me tell you this, it is suffering. It is suffering, but it was made to suffer because the minute it was born into a system with no airflow. Well, you shouldn't expect any better from the Asus card in terms of FPS, but in terms of the temperature, which is something you should care about if you care about longevity, it's running fine. A whole 20 Celsius lower than the loser OEM one from Dell. And because of the higher fin stack, the card can maintain a constant frequency better, rather than the loser OEM one having to throttle down so it doesn't melt. As some final thoughts for the system, it's ATX, so it's case swappable, and I might compare it to a Coffee Lake Celeron because by PC Mark's scores, the Celeron should be faster,
but has 2 less cores. So, to see if dual cores can beat old quad cores, the next video will be a comparison video.
While you're at it, please consider liking and subscribing, maybe even leaving a comment, because it will really help my day.